an American where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me, and I gladly stand up.
Welcome everybody to Harnett County's YouTube channel. Today we're doing an interview with Jessica Morel, who is one of our congressional candidates for District 13. Thank you for joining us. I know you're super busy on the campaign trail, and I appreciate you making the time to talk to the voters like this.
Yeah, absolutely. Make it a priority.
Awesome. So as we get started, let's go ahead and start off with your introduction. So if you want to talk a little bit about yourself and your background and why you believe that you were called to run.
Well, so I don't have any, big prepared speeches, but I'll start kind of like I do at some of the GOP conventions and tell you a little bit about me, where my background is, and sort of where some of my passions are. So I did grow up in a military family, so military is very important in my background, and I have a large focus on supporting the military with their funding, and then funding for the VA Medical Center, as well as like overhaul of the VA Medical Center. I do come from a Gold Star family, so supporting those families is also a big priority for me. They make a lot of sacrifice, and we need to make sure that we're there to support them with their needs. And so having come from that family, I think I was 15 when my father died in the service. And prior to that, he instilled this really firm sense of morals and beliefs, and you always do the right thing and you always speak your mind. So, I was young, but it stuck. So I went on through college, and then I went to medical school. I have specialized in psychiatry with a subspecialization in forensics, which is the intersection between psychiatry and the law, which is really kind of important when we talk about legislation for healthcare, mental health, and the opioid crisis. And then addiction medicine specialization is also just very important to communities. I know there's a lot of communities locally that don't have any services available throughout the state, and it varies depending upon your location in the state of what the substance or the problem is. So we need to have people in legislature that are educated about that and are moving the funds where they need to be allocated into the right programs as well. So I have that. And when we talk about forensics, we talk about some overhaul of not only the judicial system and sort of bail reform and sentencing lengths and things like that. But what other people don't understand is there are a lot of people with mental health issues that end up in the prison system. A lot of that is because they defunded state hospitals. Something like 40 years ago, they defunded the state hospitals. They thought that was like ethical. It was going to get rid of corruption. And what it did is it took a lot of people with no resources and put them in the community with no resources. So we still have this problem ongoing, and where they ended up in was the judicial system in the prisons and in the local jails, but nobody is there advocating for them. I have worked in the jail systems, and unfortunately I've seen a lot of these individuals who are not real menace. They're not a menace to society necessarily. They have misdemeanors, they have really minor crimes. Sometimes they have more serious crimes, but they didn't really have a concept, like the intent wasn't there. But they don't have anybody standing up for them, and they're quietly pleasant in the jails. They sit there and they're nice and they don't cause a disruption, so they get significantly overlooked. So I think it's really important that we have some people around that can advocate for some change in that system, because it really is a violation of civil rights. And this is, across the board. It's across ethnicities. Mental health does not discriminate at all. So that's another one of the issues I'm sort of passionate about. When I finished training, I came down here to North Carolina to work in the VA medical system, and I found a lot of corruption in that system. I also found a lot of corruption in the involuntary commitment and application of the red flag laws, which has come up a lot in news. So we've got Second Amendment rights, and we've got individual rights, restricting their freedom, locking them up, because we're not following the statutes correctly as they're written. So that system needs a lot of overhaul as well. I actually became a whistleblower against the VA Medical Center for the poor healthcare that the veterans are receiving, misallocation of funds, and this involuntary commitment abuse of the system. So in that process, becoming a whistleblower, you find out that sure, there are laws that exist supposedly to protect whistleblowers, and they're meant to kind of vet out corruption, and they're not enforced. So what happens is you're the whistleblower and you have to pay phenomenal amounts of money to defend yourself and to get your job back, which is not really how the system is meant to work, but it's dysfunctional. There is something for federal employees. It's called the Merit System Protection Board, and it's in place for federal employees to appeal their termination. And that board has not had judges on the panel for the appeals. I think it's been going on 6, almost 7 years now. So they have over 3,500 case backlog, and at least 30% of those are whistleblowers, and mostly actually physician whistleblowers. So we need somebody advocating there as well, because we're not going to have change in the healthcare system if the people who are stepping up and kind of putting their neck on the chopping block there don't have protections. And I mean, if I as a physician have a hard time affording defending myself in this situation, what about the secretary or the nurse or whoever else doesn't have the income coming in? And I didn't have the income coming in. It took a lot of loans to fight it, but it's a principle. I'm gonna fight it till the end of it. I'm gonna see it through, because I don't back down on things when I think I'm doing the right thing. So, but I just see this and I think, well, gosh, if it's this difficult for me, as a physician to navigate the healthcare system, even personally navigating the healthcare system, what is my neighbor doing? They can't navigate it. And this is why we need a bunch of change. And the only way that change is going to come for healthcare is if physicians get involved, because we know the system, like we understand it. We've seen what the insulin prices, that big pharma guy who bought out companies and raised the prices of some chemotherapy drugs just astronomically. That should never happen. And we have a lot of middlemen, a lot of corporates buying out hospitals. Hospitals used to be owned by physicians, and they would make their decisions based on like what's best for the patient. And now it's turned into a business, and we're making decisions based on what is going to make them the most money at the end of the year. And unfortunately, those of us who are physicians, providers, nurses, we are kind of powerless at this stage to do anything about it. And trust me, I mean, I'm in groups of physicians that are really distraught over this. They're leaving medicine because they morally can't stand being involved in a system that is not putting their patients first. And we've seen that with COVID-19 in particular. So that brings up a whole other realm.
We'll definitely be able to dig into that too.
Yeah. So these are some of my passions, things that have encouraged me, and I have a very strong group of female physicians behind me, and there's several of us that are trying to run and get involved and kind of affect some change, because we can sit back and we can complain about it, but we need to step up.
Absolutely.
So that is why I'm here this year.
Well, and I really appreciate you stepping up to do that, because we live in contentious times right now. Most folks I talk to, especially older folks, they're telling me, I've never seen anything like this before. Our country's never been like this before. So it's very encouraging to see people stepping up, especially those that are experts in their fields, to come in and try and advocate for change. So with that said, I'd like to ask a very generic question. It's a question I ask all of our candidates, which is, what do you feel in your mind is the job of a congresswoman as a representative for North Carolina?
Well, I think it's really basic. Your job is to keep in mind the best interests of people in the community in which you serve. And that, in my opinion, means everybody in the community in which you serve. It's not partisan. It's not, if I get into office, I'm only going to think about my group or my special interest party. It's our job to educate ourselves, to have knowledge about what we're voting on, and to make the best decision for everybody as a whole. So
sure. And what do you believe would be, well, let me preface. So as voters, when we come in to elect our candidate and we place someone into office, of course, we're symbolically handing you our own personal authorities. So if elected, do you believe that there are certain lanes that you have to stay within, or do you believe that you're getting more of a blank check from the people to go and represent on any issue that you deem necessary to get yourself involved with?
I think when people are voting for you, they are handing over a certain level of trust, and hopefully, they trust your decision-making ability. So if there's an issue that comes up that maybe we didn't talk about pre-election, because there's so many issues, you can't touch on everything pre-election, right? And although you would like to be able to gather everybody's opinion every time you have to make a decision, it's just not logistically possible. So I would hope that when they're making decisions on voting, it's not the most charismatic person, it's the most qualified person that they're putting in there. Probably for me, I'm not going to be the person that's on the news. I'm going to be the person that's sitting there reading about what I'm making a decision on the next day. And I think that's probably where we're going wrong with politics, is we're not picking people who are invested in that part of the job, like really making sure that you know what you're putting on your voting paper, and really looking at the wording of these things that are coming through.
Oh, and I'm sure that you're, like, as you mentioned earlier, being involved with the VA, you know how that wording can get really twisted really quick. So that's
Yeah.
it's
Well,
good
in
to
the
hear
legal
that.
field, yeah, the legal field too, you have to be very, very careful. And I have a lot of practice doing that, writing reports and interfacing with the judicial system that you do. Wording is very important.
Yes.
Very important.
So, so I'd like to transition a little bit now into actual issues. And the first thing I'd like to do is try and provide some differentiation between issues that are going to be impacting our district directly versus larger issues that we're facing as a state and as a country. And of course, we have a symbiotic relationship. So I think it's understood for most people that an issue in one area might also be in another. But what I really like to focus on is, as a representative, what will be your goals and in terms of the district, and how your decision making is going to impact the district specifically, and then how you see those decisions impacting the community larger, so the state and the federal level.
Okay, so our district is very diverse. So we go from Raleigh all the way to very rural. So it's going to be difficult for me to have knowledge on everything that a district needs, right? So I think it's important to network with other people that have expertise in other areas. And so say, if I was elected and I have expertise in the law and in healthcare and mental health and things like that, then I would hope people would reach out to me for some knowledge about that if they have questions. And I would certainly reach out because we have some people running in District 7, I believe, who have a ton of background in agriculture and farming. And so I don't want to be naive and think that I can make the best decisions about that topic. Yeah, so I mean, I want to surround myself with the right people, and then what applies to the smaller community, it just expounds upon for the nation. I think the big issues that we're facing really are financial right now. A lot of people, healthcare obviously has taken a big turn, especially mental health during the last 2 years. And I think anybody can kind of get on board with that. As far as constitutional rights, that's always going to be sort of a battle that seems to be continually going on, and that's something, I could probably say a constitutionalist in that way, that I would, advocate for that to be followed. So.
Gotcha. So, so let's talk a little bit about healthcare and the healthcare system, I guess, writ large, because obviously it's become a spider web, very tangled spider web between the insurance industries, the drug companies, the healthcare providers, like you mentioned earlier, it turning into a business as opposed to being patient focused. And of course, the biggest thing I believe is trust in the system, because as we've seen with COVID, you start seeing things changing left and right, and all of a sudden people start not believing, and it becomes very difficult for someone that doesn't have their MD to be able to differentiate something that is patently false versus things that are, hey, you know what, we need to keep an eye on this. So I'd like you to just expand on some of those areas and tell us about what your thoughts are.
Well, unfortunately, I think currently what we've seen in the last couple of years is that there are so many outside factors that affect how the physicians are making their decisions, that even the physicians are not making their decisions necessarily based on science. The physicians are making their decisions based on, am I going to lose my job or not? And that's not how you should be making decisions. So if you speak out against the vaccines or you question the science, because I don't, you can title it whatever you want. If you question and somebody reports you to the medical board as spreading misinformation, and you're going to lose your license. And really what you're trying to do, and it's what we're tasked with doing and what our oath is that we give patients all of the information. It is not my job to select the information that you have. It's my job to give you the options, make sure you understand the options, and let you make your own decision. But what is happening is the federal government and some of these other institutions are getting involved, and they're saying, no, doctor, you must do what we say, and you have to push this narrative. And unfortunately, I personally think it's very financially driven. So yeah, I mean, you've seen a lot of what's this, America's First Doctors, frontline doctors. There's a bunch of groups that are kind of speaking out, but every one of those physicians has lost their job. I lost my job prior to the pandemic because I spoke out against the VA and I didn't follow the line. Like, so it's been going on for a while, and it just came to this big head. And unfortunately, the general public is stuck in the middle, and they're seeing on the news and these battles. I don't think healthcare decisions should be made in the news or social media. They should be a relationship between you and your physician, and that has degraded significantly over the last couple of years. And then, of course, we have these middlemen. Anybody who has a financial interest in any medication should not be on a board, period, a government decision body at all, about approvals, about what the government recommendations are going to be, about emergency waivers. It's unethical, it's biased, it's very clearly morally wrong to be doing that. And that's what we're seeing. And sadly, it's being accepted. It's just like, oh, well, it's okay. It's okay. We have this federal employee that should be making, X amount of money a year, but they're making 100 times that salary. I don't question where that money's coming from. Their stay-at-home wife made this money at speaking events or whatever. It's not a big deal.
Right.
Average person can look at this and go, this doesn't hold water, really. And so I don't blame the public for not trusting their physicians. And that's sad, because then they're going to make decisions that probably aren't the best for them. It has a lot of long-term ramifications. We're still going to see this 10, 15 years down the road, not necessarily with COVID, but the cancer diagnoses and all the things that they don't get treatment for. And we've done a real disservice to the community the last couple of years in healthcare as a whole, in my opinion.
Sure. Well, and you brought up an interesting point about the relationship aspect between physician and patient. And I read pretty recently an article that was talking about the difference between life expectancy of someone that has a consistently the same physician versus someone that is switching all the time. And I do have a lot of friends in the healthcare field, and I know that my doctor friends, they tell me oftentimes that they're spending more time entering data into their systems than they are actually dealing with the patient. So what do you think would be like some of the top things that could be changed to help improve that scenario, to both build trust between the public and the healthcare professionals, as well as on the individual level with the physicians and the patient?
Well, I mean, this isn't going to be probably the most popular thing to say, but we've had this push over the last 10 years for mid-level providers, which are like physician's assistants and nurse practitioners. And we're removing the doctors from this scenario and having them be like supervisory. So we have one doctor overseeing, 1,000 patients that are being taken care of by other providers. There is no logistical way that I could know all of those people's charts and information and actually read the notes that are being written, and to make sure that they have the right amount of care. cheaper care is not the answer. And I think that's the biggest breakdown. They want RVUs and how many patients are you seeing a day? 30 patients a day for an internal medicine physician. That's like 15 minutes maybe or less per patient. And then you, like you said, the documentation. So you're spending less than 6 minutes in the room and you're only allowed to bring up one concern. It's not feasible, and it makes the patient feel unimportant and rushed. But these are the corporate expectations, and the physicians, I mean, they can't do anything about it. They lose their job if they don't meet these measures. And so, and what I saw at the VA is you have these measures, and then they start lying in their documentation because they don't want to fail their measures. So it's not really improving care. It's all this like downward spiral of
Right.
bad care. Yeah. The money factor needs to be out of it. And when we have CEOs making millions of dollars a year at hospitals, then that's what's driving it, really is financial. So I think there should be some caps on things like that. If we can cap what hospitals are allowed to make, and then maybe if they have to reinvest it in the community or something like that, or pay for some clinics that have physicians that can spend the long time on the complicated patients or what have you. There's different ways to reinvest that money that would be beneficial to the population. So.
Awesome. Well, segueing into a slightly different topic, but still related, I believe. Obviously, Harnett County specifically, and a lot of areas in North Carolina are struggling with drugs, opiates specifically. Obviously, I think there's two parts to this, and there's one aspect that deals with the border and things coming in across the border, but I think there's the other aspect, which is the fact that you have physicians that prescribe opiates like they're candy. I'd just like to get your thoughts on the drug issues that our communities are facing, and what your views are on that, and your proposed solutions that we can implement.
Um, Physicians are 100% responsible for the bad prescribing. I see it on a daily basis. I do contract work. I go into different areas, different hospitals, different clinics, and I see horrific prescribing practices every day. But again, it comes back to the measures, right? So the hospital system, oh, if you have all 10s and you're a wonderful 5-star doctor, then you get to keep your job. And how do you keep people happy is you tell them what they want to hear. You give them what they want. I'm not that person. I probably make people mad 50% of the time, but that's my job. So I view that as my responsibility. It's not my responsibility to make you happy in the short term. It's my responsibility to make you healthy and successful, in the long run. So yes, physicians are responsible. Now, the problem is it's gotten so restricted that when the average person goes in for a surgery or some major procedure and they do need pain control, it's almost impossible to get it. So we're swinging a little too far on the restrictions on physicians. But then we have other prescribers. We're letting so many other people that are not physicians prescribe, pharmacists, psychologists, nurse practitioners, all of these things, all these people that it's supposed to be helpful. They don't have the same training and education. And it's also going to make it much harder to monitor just by volume of prescribers. So there's probably multiple ways that we could address this. And then, of course, the border is a huge issue. That's where a lot of it's coming from. Actually, a lot comes from Japan, I think, as well. It's not even just the southern border. It's restrictions on other imports and things like that as well. But it's going to be something that's going to take a long time to fix, unfortunately.
Sure. So let's discuss some of the other issues that have been going on that you might be able to touch on. I think maybe a good starting point would be Second Amendment, and your conservative values. So if you could expand on your viewpoints on the Second Amendment, and then maybe even expand on to any of the other items that you deem extremely important that we want to discuss.
Well, okay, so Second Amendment is obviously incredibly important. That would be one of the things where you could say I fall definitely far right on the Second Amendment. A little more other social issues, medical issues, probably a little more moderate. But there are existing laws for gun control. There's background checks. There's all kinds of things that exist. Criminals do not follow laws. And this expectation that the more laws you implement, the better this is going to be is ridiculous. The more laws you implement to make the responsible individual unarmed and unable to protect themselves, you're going to have more victims. It's it it's reality. It doesn't matter. Like in Chicago's got so many, in New York City, they've got so many gun control laws. DC, I was in DC. You can't even carry pepper spray without a permit in DC. I was like, you gotta be kidding me. I'm a single female on the metro going in to the inner city to the courts, and I can't carry pepper spray with me. I mean, who are you serving when you make laws like that? You're not serving the victims. You're creating victims and targets. And I think this is a real issue. If you want to invest funds in gun education and training people on how to use them the correct way, and safety and security that way, and then enforce the laws that currently exist. I think a big gap we have is that each state has their own laws and there's no consistency across the board. So it is kind of easy to skip between areas. So I would be in favor of a national carry permit, one background check, one consistent requirement for training. I don't see that as a bad thing. Some people, maybe have a little bit of a problem saying, well, now that's the federal government having control. But I hold the same opinion about medical licenses and everything too. When you have holes between states, then there's room to exploit those holes. So it's probably better to have one consistency across the board for sure.
Sure. So we're at 26 minutes now. And I'd like to just let you have the floor for any items that you specifically want to address with the audience, with the voters of District 13.
Okay, so District 13, and I'm in Cumberland County as well, but I think there's a big issue in the state of North Carolina with environmental protections. I'm seeing it with a lot of the contaminations of the groundwater, the well water. And again, we have certain laws that exist that are supposed to protect people, but like in Cumberland County down here with the contamination by chemours and Gen X, it affected all of the farmers in the area in this. I think they said it's like an 18-mile radius or even bigger at this point, but there's no repercussions so far. We're 5 years into this, and the first court date isn't until I think another 3 years. And then that's not even a resolution. What do these farmers do? In the meantime, they can't sell their produce. They can't butcher their cattle. They can't use the land that they own. It's basically worthless.
Mm-hmm.
And they're stuck. And this is incredibly unethical. It's something that needs to be addressed. The EPA has actually changed the guidelines, and the state of North Carolina is not stepping up and enforcing that. It's kind of, for some reason, on the back burner. And this is a huge issue. People there's wells everywhere. You need clean drinking water. It's like, a natural human right to have access to this. And the fact that they let this go on for years prior to this, and then it's going on for years to even find a resolution, that needs to be addressed. And for me, that's a really big thing in this state, because it's not just, it affected the Cape Fear River all the way down to Wilmington. I'm sure that this factory isn't the only factory. I've been reading up on like the factory towns that were established and how the wind directions brought chemicals in certain parts. And I really do think that we need to invest some money and some resources into research for this, and then, correcting the problem so that people can have a reasonable resolution and that their health is protected.
Awesome. Well, I only have one last question for you. And I've been asking this to our commissioner candidates and to our congressional candidates and representatives, but what is your viewpoint on bringing things into the district versus empowering the district so that we can be the producers and export what we have?
Oh, I'm not a business major. I'll just be upfront about that. As far as manufacturing, it's always great to bring in. I know the Amazon warehouse is coming in. That's bringing in a lot of jobs to the area, but that seems to be a little more finicky, and it could go away as quickly as it's here. Whereas if you bring in some things that can produce a product, that would be great. But what we have to do is we have to prevent the outsourcing to other countries first to bring it back. locally. And I am in support of that. We need to be more self-sufficient, and we need to give our own communities jobs and resources and not outsource it. I don't care if I pay 3 times as much for, the pack of pens. If that means that my neighbor can put food on the table, then that's a reasonable sacrifice in my opinion. So I would be in support of bringing some things in, but more building a core industry in the area, something that people can rely on for years to come, and not just, stores, they come and go.
Right. Right. Well, awesome. I really appreciate your time. I know that you're really busy. I know you've been hitting it hard on the campaign trail. So as we close out, if you could just give us a closing statement, and then let people know how they can get a hold of you, how they can find your campaign and get in touch.
Oh, well, I think in closing, an important thing that people are maybe losing sight of, and I had said this at one of the other conventions, is that the primary is the primary, but District 13 is a swing district, right? So we need to pick somebody that's going to be able to appeal across the board. It was brought up at the Johnson County Convention this last weekend that 35% of the voters are undifferentiated. They're independent, kind of in the middle, and go either direction during this election. You need to find a candidate that is going to appeal to the majority. And it's great to have really firmly held beliefs that are, maybe far right or what have you, but you have to also be able to consider the other people that live in the community too. So when you're voting, maybe think about what issues that you want to improve, who has the qualifications for those issues, not necessarily who's allowed to speak about them, and then who, after the primaries, who's going to give you a good fight against the Democratic Party. And I think I can put up a pretty good fight against some of that side of the party, and not necessarily just a yelling battle, but a logical, reasonable discussion about it. So I like to say, and I was telling my friends, I was like, I think my slogan should be bringing sanity back to politics, right?
Okay.
Since that's my field. Vote with your heart, but I certainly hope that you can consider me. I don't come from a political background, but I certainly have a lot of knowledge to share, and I think I can affect change in a positive way.
Awesome. And then just real quickly, people, how can they get a hold of you? You have a website, Facebook?
It's drmorelforcongress.com. And then the Facebook page is just Dr. Morel for Congress as well. They've got, I think my website's on that Ballotopedia site as well. And some of the other interest groups, or some of the news stations, I think WRAL was one of them or something, that I've given some interviews, and they were going to also share my information, but mostly just go to drmorelforcongress.com. If you send a message, you want a question answered about my stance, it goes directly to me. I'll get back to you as soon as possible, and I'll definitely, it's coming from me. It's not some third party that's giving some canned response. So
awesome. Well, Jessica Morel, I really appreciate your time. Good luck to you into the primaries, and I look forward to seeing you at our events.
I appreciate it. You have a great evening.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
And I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died.